She goes, that's great, I want to do that, except I want to start in the other room and flow in and then circle and pull away and then rise up, and the shots get quite complicated.
Hi, my name is Roy Wagner. I'm a director of photography. I'm sitting next to one of my very favorite people on this earth, the director of photography, an incredible director of photography, him, David Mullen. And we've known each other for quite some time, but this is probably going to be the longest we've ever had a chance to talk to each other continuously. And we have this love for the history of this industry and the technology of this industry that's really exciting. David's nominated for an Emmy this year. You want to tell him about the show that you're doing?
I was nominated for the pilot for The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, and an ASC nomination for the pilot as well.
Tell me about the show.
Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, we just finished our second season of shooting, and I start the third season in a few weeks. It's set in the late 1950s. It's about an Upper West Side housewife whose husband leaves her, and she takes up stand-up comedy almost by accident. She gets drunk one night and sort of extemporaneously talks about her failed marriage and what went wrong, and generates a lot of laughs, and is convinced that she should pursue a career as a stand-up comic. So that's sort of the basic setup, and most of the first season is all set in New York City in 1959. The second season we went to Paris for a couple weeks, and we also went to the Catskills and had 3 episodes set up there, so we traveled a little more this second season.
How did you get the show?
I'd done an independent film for a director named Jamie Babbitt, and actually a short film for her first, and then an independent feature. And then she directed some television that I shot on Smash and on United States of Terror. And she was a director on The Gilmore Girls with Amy Sherman Palladino. So she had recommended me for the Gilmore Girls Netflix reboot. So I interviewed for that, and I didn't get that job. But then when the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel pilot came up, they interviewed me again, and I got hired for that.
How did you come up with the look of the show?
Well, they told me, interviewing them, before I sort of try to come up with a look, I try to get a sense of what the director is imagining in their heads, because I don't want to, come up with something opposite. I don't want to say green when they're thinking pink. So,
exactly.
And the thing they emphasized to me is that they didn't want a faded, sepia tone view of the past. They wanted it to be energetic and colorful. And from that, we had a lot of references that we talked about, everything from Woody Allen's New York films, Hannah and Her Sisters in particular, films like Lenny and Cabaret, and things set on stages. And from all these sort of discussions of movies and things to sort of piece together the look. Also looked a lot at historical reference from the time, both movies and advertisement. And we didn't want the photography to mimic the lighting style of the time, but we wanted to have that feeling. And so what I took from a lot of the 50s advertisement was this kind of, I call it almost industrial optimism, this kind of post-war positive view of industry in the future. So there's that aspect over some of the scenes. But there's also a pre-war aspect, because a lot of people live in 1930s and earlier apartments. And so even though it's set in 1959, you have different worlds that she moves through, and so each world has its kind of look based on the kind of setting it's in. The lighting aims to be naturalistic, but in a kind of flattering way. That's the sort of mandate when I took the job. She had me look at Hannah and Her Sisters because she felt the cinematographer had lit the women and the actors very well, but it still felt like a realistic sort of story. And so I watched that film, and it's lit a bit more high key, in a sense, harder lit. It's all shot on location, but clearly it set some sort of grid in the ceiling and put little spots on furniture and people. And there's a lot of classical lighting, cross lighting and frontal key lighting on the women and things like that. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to do something like that because that was more rooted in the time that film was made. But I still try to have, the key light coming from angles that are flattering to the actors while doing these very elaborate camera moves. That's part of the show. It's also, we don't do much coverage or close-ups. Our close-ups are like elbows up or waist up. Sometimes even
like a
looser.
feature.
Yeah, Tony Shalhoub does a lot of acting with his hands, and they're usually down by his pockets. So it just seems odd to frame that out when he's constantly gesturing with them. So we end up shooting him, kind of cowboy, and that's sort of often then everyone else in the scene is shot cowboy. So it's just sort of the language of the film, of the show is moving masters, not much coverage. The only time we get into coverage is dinner table scenes, restaurant scenes, that kind of thing. And even then it's on the loose-ish side.
Right.
But in between those scenes, there's a lot of movement, a lot of fast walking through rooms. And it's not in a straight line. Amy, our creator, has a dance background. So when she thinks of motion, it's often a kind of swirling 360 kind of motion. Just someone coming in through a door and going to a table somehow involves a 360-degree camera move because she wants the camera to sweep this way and then someone to counter the other way and then the camera reverse itself and then move this way. So there's never any straight line moves.
And no place to hide the lights.
Right. And I remember she once had me watch the pool scene in Color of Money. And she was like, how did they do that motion? And I said, well, it's a circle track. You can actually see the track on the ground. But she goes, that's great. I want to do that, except I want to start in the other room and flow in and then circle and pull away and then rise up. And I go, well, then it's not a circle track. That's going to be a techno crane and a movie and a magnet. And, the shots get quite complicated. So on The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, Steve Bodner at Light Iron, New York is our colorist, and he's been our colorist since the original pilot, and he does all the episodes. So for 2 seasons in the pilot, he's been the one person. And, I did extensive camera tests with him before I did the pilot, and then when I started the first season, he was there through all of it. So it's very streamlined in that aspect. But they... Amy Sherman Palladino insists that I watch every episode and give my notes about color. So basically, he does a pass, then he shows me his pass. I give adjustments to things, then he does a second pass, then he shows it to the director after that. So
it's like a film timing, like we used to do with film.
There hasn't been a lot of stuff where I haven't been involved in the timing because people always say, what if the cameraman's not invited? But usually the projects I work on, they want my input. They say that's why we hired you.
Yeah, me too. I've never had that issue. Are you using the Array
Alexa Minis?
A Mini?
Yeah.
What do you like the color space in those cameras? Are you happy with that?
Yeah, I like the Alexa. I've been using mostly the Alexa for the last 7 years, I think. Partly, I guess in a way, I don't want to have to think about the camera too much, I'd rather think about the lighting and the Alexas are so bulletproof in terms of their reliability. I know what I'm going to get out of them.
They're just a box.
Yeah, and so I can stop thinking about the Alexa, it works,
Now, are you on primes?
Yeah, we carry some zooms, although I've sent most of them back just to get more primes because we do so much Steadicam and it's almost all a 24 mil. So
are they
basically
Cooks or
no, they're Primos. It's a Panavision show, so it's Primos. We often do our Steadicam on a 24 and our coverage on a 30, and that's I'd say 80% of the show is those 2 lenses. Occasionally we get a little longer. She sometimes, for performance reasons, wants me to cross cover. And in those cases, we have to go longer lens to keep the cameras out of each other's shots. So she'll have to live with over the shoulders and 50 or 70 mil. But often we'll talk about it. She'll say, can we cross cover the scene? And I said, do you want clean singles or do you want overs? She goes, I want them clean. And I go, well, then we're going to have to shoot them separately because she wants tight eye lines as well. So the camera's literally here and the actor is just standing next to the lens, off-camera actor. But other times she feels it's important to get both performances at the same time, so she'll compromise and go with the over the shoulders, and we'll have A and B camera cross cover, which is another challenge for lighting. But considering, before the cross coverage, we were just doing some 360 camera move on a Steadicam, I've sort of had to accept that the lighting is going to be difficult.
Are you using tungsten, or are you using LEDs? Or?
I use a lot of LEDs, the light mats particularly, because we're on location a lot, and I need to rig them to ceilings that are, you know, fragile and things. But the nightclub stuff, because period-wise tungsten is what they used, I tend to light all the nightclubs and comedy clubs with tungsten Fresnels, some par cans and things, and then I mix in my own tungsten lighting with that. So those scenes tend to be tungsten, but day scenes often are LEDs or HMIs and LEDs. In the apartment, we do a lot of LED lighting.
Are you hard lighting? Are you soft lighting?
It's mostly soft lit, but she's always in a hard spotlight on stage. So I've gotten sort of used to that. We usually use a Lico for her key light when she's doing her comedy act.
Are you using cosmetic rouge or anything for a gel in the...
Sometimes I'll do just a quarter blue, actually, because the stage is all tungsten dimmed down, and then I want the follow spot to feel a little colder than all the other lights in these rooms, so I go with a quarter blue, or sometimes just white, but everything else is dimmed. I do have to, in post, sometimes deal with the fact that Rachel Brosnahan, our lead, is so much paler than our other actors that she comes off, her skin gets bluer compared to other people.
Blue is tough on skin too sometimes.
Yeah, I had a shot where a series of women stand in front of a mirror in the employee break room at the department store, and each woman does her lipstick and steps out, and the last woman was Rachel, and she just was cooler skin tone than everyone else, so I had to in post warm her up to match all the other faces. That's where digital color correction is a great help, you know.
And
in the old days, I would have had to fly in gels or, you know, done something to match people.
So, you shoot in New York. How many days per episode?
I think it's roughly 10. It's hard to say because last season we cross-boarded a lot of episodes. So I did 1 and 2 together. I did 4, 5, and 6 together. So I sort of lost track of how many days each episode individually was. Are
you going to direct any of the episodes, or you going to stay a director of photography?
I think I'll just stay a director of photography.
Yeah, Alan Davio used to get upset about that too. The guys that would go off and become directors, he'd say, "Why do you want to do that? You're confusing people. People don't know what you want to be." I could understand the appeal. I think if it were a show that was less actor-oriented, you know, more of a visually structured show, maybe I could tackle directing. But there's such a fine art to directing actors, and I don't want to screw that up. It's just when I see a director who's good with actors, it's just a skill that is so invaluable. I once did years ago a TV show with a fairly inexperienced director who would come out of theater as an actor and then was a screenwriter and then became a director, and he didn't know much about where to put the camera or when to cut, but as soon as he went to talk to the actors, his notes for them were so beautiful, and he got such great performances out of them that it didn't really matter. You know, I could help him with the technical stuff on how to cover the scene or where to put the camera or when to cut, but you know, his skill with actors was why he was hired, essentially. It's critical. I mean, and there's so many directors that hide behind the monitor, hide behind the camera. I miss the days where we stood by the camera. I don't like looking at the monitor. Yeah, and the director, Jamie Babbitt, who recommended me, she always stands next to the camera and she glances at the onboard the monitor that the focus puller is using, which sort of drives them nuts because they feel the director is staring at them. But she's just glancing at the framing on the onboard monitor, but then turns her attention back to the actors. So she's very close to them all the time. So I think that's invaluable. And Amy's like that too. She has a little director's monitor on a stand right next to the actors. She's very close to them. Except since we do so many 360s, then she's got to hide. So the actors are so insecure anyway that it's important that they sense that you're there. I think it's important that directors of photography are there too, and it's hard to do it now because most directors want to sit at the monitor. Yeah, I try to split my time up between the DIT monitor and the set with the director. It depends on the shot
and if you start running 2 cameras, it's very important for me to see what both cameras are doing at the same time, because there might be differences in headroom and other things that I want the cameras to sort of finesse. But when I see things start coming out the way I want to, and the next few takes are more or less the same, I'll move over to the director and stand by the director, just to sort of be in touch with what they're doing. But
Yeah, I like to listen to the director, hear what they're saying. So are you mostly on Steadicam, or are you on a dolly, or?
it depends. We try to pick the right tool for the job, but it's a lot of it's
A lot of
Steadicam.
movement.
Just because the shots are too complicated for anything but a Steadicam. But when I can do it on a dolly, I'd rather do it on a dolly, just because we do so many takes as well that I don't want to wear out the Steadicam operator if it's unnecessary. And he is very physically strong, and Jim McConkey on our show,
he's great.
he's a great operator, and he doesn't complain about doing a lot of takes all morning on the Steadicam, but I still try to look out for him.
Sure. Thank you so much for allowing us to have this conversation, this sort of a private conversation that we've been wanting to have for years. And I think we've got a lot more to say, and we'd like to continue it at a later date.
Great.
And maybe bring Mike Most in and Bob Primes and a bunch of other guys so we can celebrate the work that we're doing. Here we go, fist bump.